Welcome. Tonight's story is told in a calm voice to help you unwind and rest. Let's begin. Part 1. I hosted a luxurious Christmas feast. They told me, "We're on our way," then never showed up. My name is Evelyn Moore, and I'm 64 years old. This Christmas, I wanted to do something unforgettable for my family. Something grand, warm, and filled with love. So I hosted a luxurious feast at my home, the kind with soft music playing in the background, candles flickering on a long polished table, and enough food to feed twice the number invited. I spent weeks preparing every detail, from choosing gold-trimmed china to hand-tying crimson ribbons around linen napkins. I even special ordered a 7-foot Christmas tree flown in from Vermont, the kind that smells like winter and nostalgia. I wanted it to feel magical, not just another holiday dinner, but a memory my family would cherish forever. My sons told me they'd be there. My daughters-in-law sent me their favorite dessert requests. Even my sister's grown children, who usually stayed distant, confirmed they were coming. "We're on our way," one of them texted me that morning. I took my time getting ready, slipping into my gold silk jacket and fastening the same pearl necklace my husband gave me the last Christmas before he passed. I looked in the mirror and thought, for once, this house feels alive again. I lit the fire. I set out little gifts for each person. The pianist arrived at 3, dressed in black and ready to play quiet carols. The roast was resting. The wine was breathing. The house was glowing. 4 o'clock came. Then for 15. I thought nothing of it. Children, traffic, last-minute stops. But by 4:45, I felt something shift. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. I refreshed my messages. Still nothing. I called Daniel. No answer. Then Julie. Straight to voicemail. One by one, I called them all, even the cousins who barely spoke to me. No one picked up. I stared at the front door, waiting for headlights to swing across the drive, for laughter to spill in through the foyer. But the only sound was the pianist's soft rendition of Silent Night. At 5:10, the pianist paused and asked if he should continue. I told him yes. I couldn't bear the silence. At 5:20, I finally sat down at the table alone. 12 place settings, 12 crystal glasses, one woman in a gold jacket sitting at the head, still hoping the next chime of the clock would bring a knock on the door. I took a deep breath. I tried to will myself not to cry. Then I opened social media, and that's when I saw it. It was a photo, a group shot. My sons, their wives, my grandkids, all of them, standing in front of a tacky buffet decorated with plastic holly and tinfoil. Stars, paper plates in their hands, smiles on their faces, a time stamp in the corner, for 17 p.m. Christmas Day. No one looked unhappy. No one looked rushed. They were all there, together, somewhere else. Not one of them had called. Not one had even bothered to say they'd changed plans. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling slightly as I zoomed in. There was Daniel, carving a slice of ham with a plastic fork, next to April, who'd told me earlier that week she was allergic to buffet food. My youngest grandson wore the red sweater I had knit him. I could see my name embroidered in the hem. My other son, Christopher, raised a glass of soda in a toast. And in the background, I recognized the strip mall, that awful place with the neon lights and sticky floors. 5 minutes from my house. I could have walked there in heels. My heart sank deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't that they'd made other plans. It was that they hadn't told me. They hadn't even thought to include me. I wasn't sick. I wasn't difficult. I hadn't argued with anyone. I had just been forgotten. Or worse, intentionally left out. I set the phone down and looked around the room, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. The pianist had stopped playing and was quietly packing his sheet music. I hadn't even noticed. He looked at me with gentle concern and asked if I was all right. I nodded. I thanked him for coming. I paid him in full, plus a tip. As he walked out, he paused in the doorway and said, "Your house is beautiful. Someone's lucky to be coming home to this." I smiled and closed the door behind him. Then I turned back to the table. The 12 plates, the 12 chairs, the untouched roast and soufflé, and I pulled out my chair. I sat there. For a while, I don't know how long. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just sat in the middle of something I had built with love, realizing it had never been enough to keep them. The next morning, I didn't open the curtains. The candles had burned down to stubs. The untouched roast had gone cold on the counter. The gifts remained wrapped under the tree, each tagged with careful calligraphy. To Emily. From Grandma to Daniel, with love, for Christopher. Open after dinner. I sat in my robe at the edge of the sofa, the room dim, the scent of pine now slightly stale. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt hollow, like someone who had been rehearsing a play alone, only to find out the audience never planned to come. Round 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from April. "Sorry, Evelyn. Things got chaotic yesterday. Hope you had a nice Christmas anyway." No explanation. No apology. Just a gentle pat on the head from the woman who used to call me second mom. When she married my son. An hour later, Christopher posted another photo online. This one with the caption, "Sometimes the best moments are unplanned." I stared at that line so long the letters blurred. I thought about replying, about asking, "Was I ever in your plan?" But I didn't. I closed the app. I stood up. I walked into the dining room and started collecting the untouched plates. One by one, polished, cleaned, wrapped away. I packed the gifts into a box. I didn't write return to sender. I just labeled it next year. I paused at the piano. His sheet music was still there. I slid it into its case and tucked it beneath the bench. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone performing a ritual only they could understand. Then I went into the guest room, the one I'd prepared for the grandkids, and folded every towel, smoothed every blanket, and turned the sign on the door that said "Santa sleeps here" to face the wall. I wasn't going to beg for their time. I wasn't going to chase the crumbs of their affection. But I wasn't done either. Not yet. The sun set early that day, casting long amber shadows across the floor as I stood in the quiet kitchen, watching the last bits of snow melt from the corners of the window panes. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see any more than I already had. Everything was too pristine, too curated, as if the joy I had tried to create had suffocated under its own perfection. Around 6 p.m., I poured myself a glass of the Cabernet I had opened for dinner. It tasted dry, bitter, and expensive. I carried it into the sitting room, where the fireplace still crackled gently. The stockings hung limp. The mantle garland had begun to wilt. I sat in my late husband's old leather chair and let the silence stretch, until it folded itself around me like a second skin. Somewhere in that silence, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, just a quiet, internal tilt. I picked up my planner The one where I'd circled December 25th 3 times and written "Everyone's coming home." I flipped to a blank page. I didn't cry. I didn't make a speech. I just started writing. Not a letter. Not a confrontation. Just notes, details, memories. What they said. What they didn't. What they chose instead. Not to weaponize. Not to guilt. Just so I wouldn't forget. Because this was no longer just about Christmas. This was about clarity. About finally seeing the lines they had drawn long ago. The ones I kept stepping over, pretending they weren't there. And as I wrote, I felt lighter. Not better, but clearer. That night, I wrapped the leftovers in foil, stacked the china away, blew out the last of the candles, and turned off the tree. I walked slowly up the stairs, not with sorrow, but with certainty. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. When I read stories like Evelyn's, it always reminds me that some betrayals don't come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes, it's just silence that says everything. But if you think Evelyn's just going to let this slide, think again. Part 2 reveals how one forgotten Christmas started a chain of quiet moves no one saw coming. Part 2. They called it a simple misunderstanding. I called it my wake-up call. The next day, I woke up at 6:02 a.m. out of habit. The house was quiet, my room dim, the sky outside still cloaked in deep blue. I didn't rush to check my phone. I didn't turn on the Christmas lights. I just sat on the edge of my bed, fingers gently curled into the satin hem of my robe, and listened to the weight of the silence that used to comfort me, but now pressed down like a judgment. For the first time in years, I didn't go into the kitchen first. I went to my study. I unlocked the drawer that held my old photo albums, the ones they used to love flipping through when they were little. Page after page of birthdays, graduations, messy kitchen counters, and handmade cards with "We love you," Grandma scribbled in crayon. I didn't cry. I just looked at those faces, smaller, softer, unguarded, and wondered at what point I became optional. After an hour, I closed the book and picked up my calendar. The planner I'd used all year still sat open on the desk. Red and gold stickers neatly placed on family birthdays, school plays, doctor appointments I had no business remembering except that I did. I took a pen and began drawing lines through every commitment, every favor, every promise I had made to people who couldn't give me one evening of honesty. Then I made a list, not of grievances, of boundaries. No more monthly checks for Daniel's mortgage. No more babysitting favors dropped on me with 3 hours' notice. No more funding April's boutique relaunch, which she never even thanked me for. I wasn't doing this out of bitterness. I was doing it because I finally understood. I had been offering gold to people who only ever handed me back dust. I called the bank and scheduled a transfer. I closed one account and opened another under a trust I had never told them about. I called the lawyer next. I wasn't going to remove them from the will. That would have been too obvious. But I was going to restructure it. I added contingencies, timelines, truth tests. Let them earn what they once took for granted. Round noon, I received a group text from Daniel. "Hope everyone's having a relaxing day. We're thinking of swinging by later this week. Maybe Friday." I stared at it for a long time. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just another casual request. As if nothing had happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent a separate message. One sentence. "Thank you for confirming where we stand." Then I turned off my phone and went for a walk. I walked for almost 2 hours without direction. Past the bakery where I used to take the boys for hot cocoa after Christmas pageants. Past the park bench where I once helped Christopher memorize his lines for the school nativity play. Every step felt like peeling away another layer of old loyalty I hadn't realized I still carried. When I returned home, I didn't step into the past. I stepped into something new. I pulled out the donation boxes I'd kept in the garage and began sorting. Toys the grandkids never opened. Cookware no one but me ever touched. Trinkets bought with them in mind but never acknowledged. I didn't want to cling to reminders of people who saw me as convenience, not kin. I made piles. Donate, sell, release. It felt ruthless. It felt incredible. That evening, I sat with my lawyer again, a woman just a few years older than April, calm and efficient, someone who spoke with clarity I admired. I told her I wanted to restructure more than the will. I wanted to rewrite the narrative. We opened a foundation, quiet, discreet, named after my grandmother, the only woman in my life who ever made me feel truly seen. It would provide grants to older women starting over. Women like me. Women whose families had slowly erased them with absence disguised as busyness. I funded it with assets I had long earmarked for family birthdays and future college tuition. They had enough. I was done bleeding myself dry for people who couldn't even answer a phone call. That night, I poured another glass of wine, turned on only the tree lights, and put on one of Henry's old jazz records. For once, the house didn't feel empty. It felt cleared. Like finally, there was space for something better. To begin, the calls started a week later. First, a text from Daniel. Just, "Hey, hope you're doing okay. Things got crazy last minute." No apology. No explanation. Just a casual sentence tossed like a paper napkin over a ruined meal. I didn't reply. Then came April's message, longer, polished. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you knew plans had shifted. Christopher assumed Daniel had told you, and Daniel thought I had. It was a miscommunication, nothing more. Please don't take it personally." But I had. Because it was personal. Because it always had been. Every missed dinner, every holiday left unanswered. Every plan I made with hope and they abandoned with excuses. It had all been personal. I didn't reply to her either. On the second Sunday of January, Christopher called. His voice sounded rehearsed. He said they wanted to stop by, make things right. I told him I was unavailable. I wasn't angry. I wasn't cruel. I was just busy. Rebuilding a life didn't leave room for rehearsed regret. I spent my afternoons working with my lawyer on grant approvals, funding requests, anonymous donation letters. Every evening, I lit the fireplace and cooked something just for me. Not for 12 people who might not show. For me. I tried new recipes. I ate at the table, sometimes on the couch. I played jazz. I wore the pearl necklace Henry had given me 30 years ago, just because it made me feel beautiful. In early February, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note in a child's scrawl. "Grandma, we missed you. Why didn't you come?" It was from my youngest grandson. It cracked something in me that I had tried so hard to keep sealed. I held the paper for a long time before putting it in the drawer next to my bed. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Not until they could understand that absence has weight. That silence echoes. That being left out of the table doesn't. And when the food is gone, it lingers. It shapes. It teaches. And what I was learning, day by day, was that love without respect isn't love at all. The first invitation came mid-February. A birthday party for one of the grandkids. A casual text from April, cheerful and bright, with emojis and exclamation points. As if nothing had happened. As if the silence of Christmas hadn't echoed through the walls of my home. I stared at the screen, rereading the message. No mention of the missed dinner. No acknowledgement. Just a request to bring my famous lemon. Squares if I had time. I didn't respond. I marked the date in my calendar anyway. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. On the day of the party, I put on a soft cashmere sweater, did my hair the way Henry used to love, and drove past the venue. I didn't stop. I didn't go inside. I just watched from the car as they laughed and took photos and lived in a version of reality, where I was optional, where I was just another seat that could be left empty. I went home, made the lemon squares anyway, and delivered them the next day to the local shelter. The volunteers smiled, grateful. One woman asked for the recipe. I wrote it down by hand and tucked it in her coat pocket. That evening, as I sat with a book I had already read twice, there was a knock at the door. Daniel. Alone. He looked nervous, like a child unsure if he'd be welcomed. I opened the door but didn't step aside. He looked down, shuffled a bit, then handed me a folded piece of paper. We all signed it, he said. It's not enough, but it's something. I took it. He didn't linger. I read it later. A handwritten apology from each of them. Different pen colors, different handwriting. Some sentences felt real. Others felt rehearsed. But the one from Christopher simply said, I forgot you were the glue. I'm sorry for letting us fall apart. That one stayed with me. I didn't call them back. Not yet. I let the days unfold slowly, like winter turning to spring. I tended my garden. I sent a bouquet anonymously to the pianist with a thank you note. I donated my 12 dinner plates to a women's shelter and replaced them with 4 delicate porcelain, hand-painted, chosen for myself. I wasn't closing the door. I was simply choosing when to open it. And this time, they'd have to knock loud enough to be heard. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam doors. But make no mistake, this was her power move, quietly reclaiming her space, her dignity, her story. The family thought an apology would reset everything. But Evelyn's silence speaks louder than their words ever could. And in part 3, we'll see what happens when the one they took for granted becomes the one they can't reach. Part 3. They thought I'd be waiting, but I was already gone. Spring came early that year. The snow melted in quiet sheets along the roofline. The air shifted from bitter to soft, and the tree in my front yard bloomed pink before the neighborhood even noticed. I had taken down the last of the Christmas lights by then, not because I felt ready to let go, but because I didn't want to look like I was still waiting. I wasn't. I had started hosting afternoon teas with women from the community center, widows, retired teachers, grandmothers raising grandchildren. We laughed. We listened. We shared things our families never bothered to ask. It felt like breathing again after years of holding it in. One Tuesday, as I was pouring jasmine tea and slicing scones, my front doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. On the porch stood April, holding a bouquet of daffodils wrapped in brown paper. Behind her, Daniel and Christopher hovered, clearly not expecting to be invited in. I didn't move. I let the moment hang. April spoke first. We came to listen, she said. Her voice wasn't rehearsed this time. She looked tired, smaller, human. I opened the door, but only halfway. Now's not a good time, I said gently. I have guests. I didn't slam the door. I didn't send them away. I just let them see me, surrounded by laughter that wasn't theirs, warmth they no longer had a claim to. That evening, I sat in my study and stared at a photo of the boys when they were young, muddy from baseball, holding up a worm like it was treasure. I missed that version of them, the ones who still needed me. But I also knew I couldn't mother them forever. I had done enough mothering for people who no longer saw the woman behind the apron. That weekend, I volunteered at the community garden. A little girl named Leela tugged at my sleeve and said, "You're the nice lady who brings muffins." I smiled. I felt something shift inside. Not sadness, not regret, just peace. I wasn't replacing my family. I was rebuilding myself, one rooted moment at a time. 3 days later, I got a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail. A letter, handwritten, sealed in one of those grocery store greeting card envelopes, pink with a faded rose on the flap. It was from Christopher. The first line read, "I didn't know how to talk to you, so I wrote instead." He went on about memories, the apple pie I used to make, the Halloween costume I sewed by hand when he was 6, the time he got sick before prom and I sat by his bed all night reading to him from an old gardening magazine, because it was the only thing nearby. It was a strange letter, full of nostalgia, apology threaded between every paragraph like he didn't know how to say sorry. So he wrote around it. At the end, he asked if I'd consider having lunch sometime. Just you and me. No performances. I held that letter in my lap for a long while, staring at the script, the loops in his lowercase g's that hadn't changed since high school. I didn't cry, but something inside softened just a little. The next morning, I pulled down the old tablecloth from the high shelf, the blue and white checkered one I used to pack for picnics. I pressed it, folded it, and tucked it into my bag, not because I was planning anything, but because I realized I might. The same afternoon, my neighbor's granddaughter, a college student home for spring break, knocked on my door asking if she could interview me for a local history project. I laughed and said I didn't think I was very interesting. She said, "But you've lived." I offered her tea, and we sat under the tulip tree while I told her stories no one in my family had ever asked to hear. She listened, really listened, like what I had to say mattered. I hadn't felt that in years. Not in my own home, not with my own blood, and something about that, about being heard by someone with no expectations, no guilt, number history to rewrite, made me wonder how much of myself I had edited down just to keep the peace. Maybe I wasn't lonely. Maybe I was just done shrinking. That weekend, I drove out to the coastal town where my sister used to live, just for the scenery. I hadn't been there in over a decade, not since our falling out over a family heirloom that no one even cared about anymore. The drive was quiet, soft music playing as the shoreline came into view. I parked near the harbor and walked along the boardwalk, breathing in the salt air and watching couples sip coffee on benches. It hit me then. No one knew where I was. Not Christopher, not Daniel, not the grandkids. No one had called in days. And it wasn't painful. It was peaceful. I wandered into a little antique store I used to love, run by a woman named Marjorie who always remembered birthdays and never forgot a name. She wasn't there anymore. A new girl sat at the register, young and kind, and when I bought a glass pendant shaped like a seashell, she asked if it was a gift. I said no. I said it was for me. Her smile was real. I walked out with the tiny bag in hand, and for the first time in so long, I felt like the person I used to be. before I became mom, grandma, the one who handles everything. I drove home at sunset, the sky bleeding gold behind the hills, and when I walked through my front door, the silence greeted me like an old friend. No judgment, no tension, just space. I lit a candle, made a simple dinner. I didn't even set the big table, just the little nook by the window where the light hits just right in the evening. And as I sat down, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone once. I hadn't checked messages. I hadn't waited. I had simply lived my day for me. And that realization didn't make me sad. It made me grateful. The next morning I woke up without an alarm, the winter sun barely breaking through the curtains, casting soft gold lines across my duvet. And for once I didn't feel the rush to get up, to bake, to plan, to organize something for someone else. I simply laid there, still, the silence warm rather than lonely. And when I finally got up, I brewed my favorite coffee and opened the old wooden box where I kept letters and cards from over the years. Most were yellowing now, edges curled, ink faded, but one stood out, newer, unopened, with Daniel's handwriting on the front. No stamp, hand-delivered. I didn't know when he had dropped it off. Maybe weeks ago. Maybe that night when I was setting the table and didn't hear the gate open. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled it open, and inside was a single sheet, short, but messy, like he'd written it fast. It said, "Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I'm sorry. I thought we were all doing what was best. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't want anyone fighting again. I hope one day we can sit together and laugh like before. Love, Daniel." I stared at the words for a long time, letting the anger and ache swirl together, unsure which was louder, unsure whether the letter was a genuine step or a guilty afterthought. And yet it was something, a tiny sliver of acknowledgement, in a sea of silence. But I didn't cry, not then. I folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into the pages of a cookbook he'd given me years ago, back when they still needed me to host every holiday. And then I went outside, scarf around my shoulders, and took a slow walk through the neighborhood, passing houses with wreaths still hanging and children's toys scattered on frozen lawns. And a few people waved, some even stopped to chat, and I smiled. I really did. Because for the first time in a long time I wasn't pretending. I wasn't forcing joy through disappointment. I was simply present, with no expectations. No one waiting for me to cook or explain or hold everything together. I was just a woman taking a walk in winter, quietly deciding what she'd bring with her into the new year and what she'd finally, mercifully leave behind. I took off the apron and folded it neatly on the edge of the counter. The house no longer smelled of cinnamon and rosemary. It smelled like silence. I walked slowly down the hallway, pausing by each photo that still hung on the walls. Each frame a frozen moment that now felt dishonest. Their baby pictures, the graduation portraits, the wedding smiles. I used to polish these frames every week, dust off their edges like a ritual. But now I saw them for what they were, reminders of how much I had poured in, and how little had come back. Upstairs, I pulled out the small suitcase I hadn't touched in years, the one I'd kept for emergencies. I filled it slowly, to dresses, one coat, my favorite perfume, a small pouch of keepsakes that mattered only to me. The envelope with the will stayed in the desk drawer, exactly where I had left it after revising it last spring. I had tried, one last time, to hope, but now hope felt like a dangerous indulgence. I wrote a short note, not angry, not dramatic, just clear. "I'll be gone for a while. Please don't call. If I come back, it will be on my terms. Then I picked up my keys and left the lights on. Let them wonder. Let them feel the emptiness. I stepped outside into the winter air, the cold catching on my breath like the truth I'd held in too long. The gate clicked softly behind me, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't walking toward them. I was walking away, and it felt like the first real holiday I'd ever given myself. Evelyn didn't chase closure. She built something stronger, peace, on her own terms. In part 3, the silence wasn't a wound. It was armor. And now, the ones who left her behind are beginning to realize the door they shut may not open again. But what happens when they come knocking? Part 4 is where everything turns. Part 4. The invitation they never sent, and the reply I wrote anyway. By the time April called again, it was early April. The season, not the woman, and I was already halfway across the state, staying in a quiet rental cottage near a lake I used to visit with Henry before the boys were born. The phone buzzed on the nightstand while I was making tea. I watched it vibrate twice, then fall silent. No voicemail, no text, just a name blinking on the screen like it still had permission to enter. I didn't return the call. I had stopped needing explanations. I no longer wanted them to understand why I left. I only needed them to feel what I had felt. The pause, the doubt, the realization that someone you thought would always be there wasn't. In the mornings, I walked the trail behind the cottage, wrapped in Henry's old fisherman's sweater, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. By afternoon, I'd write, not stories, not letters, just thoughts, fragments of myself I hadn't heard in years. I wrote about freedom, about silence, about the weight that lifts when you stop waiting to be chosen by people who never saw you fully. One morning, I stopped at the little local cafe where no one knew my name, and for once, that felt like a blessing. The waitress, maybe 21, maybe 22, called me ma'am and asked if I wanted lemon in my tea. I said yes. She smiled like it mattered. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the water and reread the letter Christopher had written me months ago. For the first time, I saw the pain between the lines. Not guilt, not exactly, just loss. Like he knew something had broken and couldn't name what it was. I didn't cry, but I folded the letter with care, placed it back into my suitcase, and whispered aloud, I hope you're learning. Not out of cruelty, out of hope. Because if they ever wanted to truly find me again, they'd have to start by seeing me, not as a role, not as a fallback plan, but as a whole, breathing woman who had finally remembered how to live without them. I stayed awake the entire night after that confrontation, listening to the silence of my once joyful home, interrupted only by the soft ticking of the antique clock in the hallway, a gift from my late husband, who would have never allowed this kind of disrespect to go unanswered. By morning, I had made a decision. If they could forget me so easily, then maybe it was time I remembered myself. I began by calling my lawyer, a quiet, capable man named Gregory who had handled our estate for over 2 decades. I asked for a meeting, and when he heard the firmness in my voice, he didn't question anything. That afternoon, I arrived at his office with a leather folder full of documents, photos, and handwritten letters. Gregory glanced through them and asked gently, Are you sure you want to do this? I didn't hesitate. I am, I said. More than ever. We rewrote the will. We restructured the trust. The charity I had always dreamed of supporting, a foundation for elderly women, abandoned by their families, was now the sole heir to the estate. Aside from a few carefully selected scholarships and donations in the name of my late husband, I left nothing to chance. The house, the accounts, the heirlooms, every single item that had once been earmarked for my sons and their families was now redirected. Gregory was thorough, meticulous, and he made sure it was airtight. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I booked a vacation, a real one, a luxurious, all-inclusive retreat in the south of France. I didn't tell a soul. The next day, I left the house in the hands of a trusted caretaker and boarded the plane with a silk scarf tied around my hair and not a single ounce of guilt. My first morning there, I woke to the sound of the sea outside my window and the scent of fresh croissants from the hotel kitchen. For the first time in years, I felt light, free, not waiting on anyone, not hoping for a text that never came. I walked the cobblestone streets with a gentle smile, nodding at strangers who reminded me that the world was full of kind people I had never given myself the chance to meet. When I returned home 2 weeks later, the house was still pristine, still full of silence, but I didn't feel lonely anymore. I felt new, reclaimed. The piano still sat in the corner, the 12 chairs still around the table, but I no longer stared at them with sorrow. I saw them as a memory, a reminder of what I gave, and what I finally chose to stop giving. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room, lights off, watching the snow fall through the tall windows. I watched it pile up on the hedges, soften the sharp edges of the world. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I felt everything inside me, all the warmth I had tried to give for years, cool into something harder, colder. The next morning, I woke up not in bed but curled in the armchair, a blanket around my shoulders, and I knew something had shifted. I didn't check my phone. I didn't text or call. I didn't even answer the voicemail Daniel had left at 2 a.m. saying, "Hey, Mom. Sorry we couldn't make it. Things got kind of complicated. Hope you had a nice evening though." A nice evening, with 12 untouched plates and 12 empty chairs, with a roast that had gone cold while they laughed over a buffet 5 minutes away. No. I got up, brewed coffee, and walked out onto the porch in my slippers. The wreath still hung on the door, cheerful and useless. Across the street, the neighbors were packing their car for a ski trip. They waved. I waved back, politely, as if nothing had happened. I spent that day differently than I ever had before. I didn't clean. I didn't plan. I didn't organize leftovers into neat containers. I didn't do anything except exist. I walked through the house, through the silence, like a ghost, visiting the life I used to think was mine. I found myself opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. My late husband's drawer in the hallway, still full of odds and ends, cufflinks, handkerchiefs, a Swiss Army knife he never used. I sat on the floor beside it, ran my fingers along the edge of a box I hadn't opened since the funeral. Letters, photos, notes he'd scribbled on napkins and tucked away like they meant something. I looked at a picture of us from our first Christmas in this house. I was wearing red lipstick. He was pretending to be annoyed by the matching sweaters. We looked like people who believed in forever. But forever didn't show up last night. Forever didn't even call. And in that quiet space, I realized something else. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of them. The version of my family I had built in my mind and protected for so long, even when they chipped away at it year after year. Maybe it wasn't just them who had moved on. Maybe, finally, I had to. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that fills your ears with the sound of your own heartbeat. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the empty passenger seat. I passed the strip mall where they'd spent that Christmas Day, the neon still flickering, the same sad red and green banner hanging limp above the entrance. I turned the corner where my grandson once lost his mitten, and I stitched him a new pair that same night. I passed the florist who always gave me a free stem for being so elegant. And when I finally pulled into my driveway, it struck me how still everything was. No porch light, no footsteps behind the curtains, just the kind of stillness you feel when a house knows its story is changing. Inside, I slipped off my heels and left them by the door. But instead of heading to my room, I walked to the mantel. The photo was still there. The family portrait from years ago, before the wives and the complications, when all it took to make them laugh was a silly face or a bad knock-knock joke. I picked it up, held it, then slowly placed it inside the drawer. Not because I was angry, but because I was done begging it to mean something to people who didn't remember how it was made. That night, I cooked for one. I ate by candlelight, not to be dramatic, but because I liked it. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the window, let the cold air hit my skin, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for a call, waiting for someone to knock, waiting for a reason to feel loved again. I wasn't waiting anymore. I had spent so many seasons preparing a table they never came to. Now I was ready to prepare a life, not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because I finally understood something they didn't. That a woman doesn't need to be included to matter. She just needs to stop handing out invitations to people who keep pretending they're lost in the mail. You've made it through the 4th chapter of Evelyn's bittersweet reckoning, a chapter of quiet revelations, small defiance, and the echo of years lived politely. But something is shifting. The world she once built around love and tradition is no longer silent. In the final part, everything will come full circle. Not in the way anyone expects, but in a way only Evelyn could deliver. Don't miss the ending. It's the kind of finale you won't forget. Part 5. The table I set for myself. The day after New Year's, I woke to silence. No notifications, no missed calls, no cheerful voicemail from Daniel pretending like nothing had happened. The tree lights blinked half-heartedly in the dim morning, and the one-sprouted dining table stood cleared but not cleaned. A few crumbs, a wine glass tipped over, and the smell of cinnamon slowly turning sour. I moved through the house like a guest. Every photo frame on the wall suddenly looked staged. Posed smiles, forced arms draped over each other. I stood in front of one with Christopher holding his firstborn. His eyes were already looking past me. Even then, I hadn't noticed it before. I walked into the den and picked up the letter I had written but never sent, the one I had placed under each plate that night, before I knew no one would come. I had written 12 copies, folded them neatly, personal but not accusatory, kind but honest. I had wanted to say, I miss you. I'm still here. Please don't forget I love you. But now the words felt small, weak, like a note tucked under a door that would never be opened again. Still, I stacked them, sealed them, and placed them by the front door. I didn't know what I would do with them yet. Maybe burn them, maybe mail them anyway, maybe keep them in a drawer just to prove to myself that I once tried. Later that morning, I opened the living room curtains and saw a package on the porch. It hadn't been there the night before. No knock, no message, Just a simple brown box with no return address. My name in block letters. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was the red sweater I had knit for my grandson. The very same one I'd seen him wearing in that photo. But it was clean, pressed, folded perfectly, and on top of it, a card. No words inside, just a photo, a candid one. Me, standing at the front door weeks earlier, smiling as I held the sweater up in the air. Someone had taken it from the car. Someone had been watching. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something worse. Clarity. It wasn't that they didn't love me. It was that they didn't know how to love me anymore. Or maybe they just didn't want to. I didn't expect to see her car parked across from my house. That little white sedan with the dent in the side and the mismatched mirror. April hadn't driven it in years, or so she claimed. But there it was, just idling, with her in the driver's seat, head down like she was reading something. I didn't move at first, just stood behind the curtain, heart knocking loud enough I was sure she'd hear it if I stepped outside. She didn't get out, didn't even look up. I watched her for 5, maybe 10 minutes, waiting for some sign, a phone call, a message, even a glance. But nothing, just the occasional blink and her finger tapping the steering wheel. Then she pulled away. No knock, no apology, not even a guilty glance at the house she'd once sat in for hours every Sunday. I sat back down and told myself it didn't mean anything. But something in me cracked open. Later that night, I found a message in my inbox. No subject, no greeting, just a photo of the Christmas table I'd set. 12 plates, still full, still untouched, taken from outside the window. No caption, no explanation, just that single image. I couldn't sleep after that. My thoughts spiraled. Who took it? Why? When? And more than that, why send it now? I had locked every door, closed every curtain. The lights were dim. Whoever it was had stood outside in the cold, in silence, watching me. The next day I checked my cameras, the ones Daniel had installed when I first moved in. I'd forgotten they even worked. Sure enough, one had picked up movement. Around the side gate, a figure, hooded, slow, pausing by the kitchen window. But the footage glitched right as the person turned. A brief flicker, then static. When the image returned, they were gone. I stared at the screen, rewinding again and again, trying to make out a face, a detail, anything. But it was like they'd slipped through the cracks of the night itself. The air in the house felt colder after that. Not just physically. It was something else. A kind of presence. A knowing. I caught myself turning on lights in rooms I wasn't using, locking the bathroom door behind me, sleeping with the hallway lamp on. And all the while, no one called. No one checked in. No one acknowledged anything that had happened. Not the silence. Not the photo. Not the person standing outside my window with a camera. I left the image open on my computer screen for days. Like if I stared long enough, it might explain itself. But all it did was sit there, echoing everything I already knew. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to stay away. And someone, maybe more than one, wanted to make sure I didn't forget it either. I left the light on that night. Not the warm lamp on the side table, but the main chandelier, the one I'd polished and dusted and admired for years. I let it flood the living room in golden shine, not because I was expecting anyone, but because I wanted the silence to have nowhere to hide. The quiet was too loud in the dark. I sat in my armchair with the unopened wine still on the side, The same one I'd picked out to pair with the roast they never came to eat. A few hours passed. Then, around midnight, a car pulled up. I didn't recognize it. I didn't move. A moment later, the doorbell rang. I walked slowly to the door, not hurrying, not hoping. And when I opened it, it wasn't one of them. It was a neighbor, a kind man I'd only spoken to once or twice over the years. He held out a foil-wrapped tray and said his wife had made too much food and thought I might like a warm plate. I invited him in, unsure why. We didn't talk much. He just sat with me. I poured the wine. We shared that meal in near silence. But it didn't feel empty. It felt like the opposite. The light above us hummed softly. The house, for the first time in days, felt lived in. When he left, he said, "You ever need company again, just knock." And I believed him. Not because he was a savior, but because he'd shown up without a reason. I didn't need saving. I just needed to be seen. I washed the plates. I folded the napkins. And I stood at the doorway for a moment, looking out into the quiet street, thinking maybe I'd stop waiting. Maybe I'd stop letting them define what joy should look like. Maybe this year, I'd buy a ticket, take a trip, or throw a party and not tell anyone who didn't ask how I was doing. Maybe being forgotten by the people you loved was only tragic if you let it keep you frozen. And maybe, just maybe, I was done being cold. I didn't go after them. I didn't make a scene. I didn't demand explanations or apologies. I just lived, quietly, beautifully, purposefully. I stopped sending invites. I stopped pretending not to notice who showed up, only when there was something to gain. I started traveling, Venice in the spring, Lisbon in the fall, and a cabin in Maine every December, where the air smelled like pine and not a single soul knew my name. I painted again, not because someone told me I was good, but because I finally had something to say. I hosted dinner parties for friends who brought wine and laughter, not expectations. I donated my time, my books, my old piano. And that Christmas, 1 year later, when my doorbell rang, not one, but 3 times, I let it ring. I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and watched the snow fall. I knew who it was. I had seen the messages, the voicemail from Daniel, saying, "We missed you last year." The photo from Christopher of his new daughter wearing a red sweater. "Thought of you when we found this in storage." Even April had sent a recipe with a note. "This was always better when you made it." But I didn't reply. I had given them time, space, grace, and they'd used it to remember what I once meant. Now that they couldn't have it on demand, I smiled at the door, at the silence, at the life I had stitched back together from the broken threads they left behind. This wasn't bitterness. It was peace, earned, lived, and wholly mine. Sometimes silence is louder than any apology. Sometimes being forgotten is the gift that lets you remember who you really are. Evelyn didn't need to shout, beg, or prove herself. She just needed time and a table of her own. If this story made you feel something, stay with us. Because some truths age like wine, and some families only notice when the bottle's empty.